Welcome to Between Data and Risk podcast. Today, we'll be discussing continuous improvement and sales processes, achieving a sustained continuous improvement culture with our guest, Craig J. Garner, Director of Operational Excellence at Ivoclar. Stay tuned. If you're a business owner or senior manager, you probably had more than enough about all the wonderful opportunities awaiting you in the era of digitalization.
Whether it is big data, cloud, data science, or whatever buzzword is currently trendy.
If you would like to hear someone dissecting these claims and showing you what it actually takes to improve business processes, you're in the right place.
This is Between Data and Risk, where we discuss real-life examples of what works and what doesn't in the world of business operations.
Hello, I'm Artur, Cognition Search Solution Chief Risk and Strategy Officer, and with me is my co-host, your friendly neighborhood data guy, Dr. Marian.
Hello, everyone.
Welcome to this episode of Between Data and Risk. Today, we'll be talking about operational excellence and continuous improvement, and we are pleased to have with us our guest, Craig Garner, Director of Operational Excellence at Ivoclar. Hello.
Hello. Thank you very much for having me today.
Nice to have you here. Great. Let's start with what we just heard from you. Ivoclar is celebrating 100 years anniversary, and it got a bit of rebranding from Ivoclar Vivaden to Ivoclar. Tell us more about your company and how it feels to work for a company that reached this respectable milestone of 100 years, and what is the kind of the secret, how the culture in the company works.
Sure. And again, thank you very much for having me here today. It feels very honored to sit here with you too, and to really talk about my company and what I do. So you're correct. Ivoclar celebrated its 100 years this year in 2023. And one other notable company also comes to mind, which is Disney. So Disney is also celebrating their 100 years this year. So just as we know, Disney has a very strong culture. From my experience, I've been with Ivoclar for about 14 years now. They have a very strong culture and leadership. So in my experience, I think, any company that can boast 100 years is doing something right. And from my experience, I think, it really comes down to two key areas, which is, again, leadership. What tone are they setting? What environment are they creating? And then that environment that's being created, subsequently becomes the culture within an organization, right? What's important? What do we focus on? So I think those are two key pieces that I think helps make a company last up to 100 years.
It's a really good company to be in. I mean, Disney and Ivoclar, and it's good to be in the company with the high culture. Can you tell me what elements, because we are very oriented towards processes, and we discover, to be honest, running this podcast for a couple of months now, that the culture is at least as important. We still will be defending processes, but the culture is at least as important as processes. And you are Chief of Operational Excellence. How does the culture work with processes, and what is the culture in Ivoclar that hopefully will take it over next 100 years?
So it really starts from the top down. And so Ivoclar is a privately held organization, and it really starts with the core values from top down. And I think what this does, and again, I would say a hallmark for leadership is being that guidance, that beacon, right? So where are we going? What should we be looking towards? And I think Ivoclar has done a very good job at having a strong mission, a strong vision, and strong values. And that it's not just words, but they're also lived. So, you start to get examples of our literature, reflects our values. Our training reflects our core values. And that is then backed by actions by, let's say, leadership and the different subsidiaries. So this could show that, hey, for us, these are the actions we did that really are in line with our values. So whether it's
can you give us an example? Can you give us an example? Because I'm afraid that the words like mission, vision, and values are very overused. And we discussed it in our podcast as well, that everybody is talking about mission, vision, and values. It's like 101 of consultancy. You need to set it up for the company. And then when it comes to actual decisions, there is only one value, which is monetary value. And I believe that it's not what you're talking about. So to the buzzwordify, if I can make up such a word,
Sure.
if you could give us an example of a value and like some actual decisions and operational decisions, like where maybe profit was set up on the second place and some value above it, or
That's
at least equally.
Well, yeah. So I think it's a great question. I think an example could be really one of the core missions is to make people smile, right? So we're in dental, right? So
Right.
we want to make people smile. So if we then look at, okay, then where do we make that connection? So I would say that would connect with, let's say, my role. So with operational excellence, we're focused on well, in my role, I focus on salespeople. So I work with sales teams, help them identify their processes and where value is being delivered in that process. And when you make that connection of the salesperson, the value they're delivering into their customer, in there should be, okay, are we making the customer smile? So the value that we are generating. So if we are sitting down with a customer face to face and helping them be more successful, understanding what is it that they're doing. So whether it's a dental practice or a dental laboratory, I think that's where you can start to make the connection. But you're right. I think it's, and you've seen it from your experience where it just becomes words and it's not something that is part of the actual operating culture.
Mm-hmm.
I'm listening to this, and one thing that kind of circles around my head is you are a privately held company, and I haven't worked in my life apart from this company, Cognition Shared Solutions, which is privately held, but it's actually it's a consultancy. But previously, I worked only in companies that were either publicly traded companies, or in case of Rabobank, it's a cooperative, and there the cultures were very different. Every time I actually encountered a privately held company, the mindset of not having shareholders, not having someone who isn't kind of interested in the company but in its profits, which is very often very different. It presents a very very kind of different viewpoint. Do you kind of feel the same, that being privately held is at the core of being able to hold this mission first mindset?
It is, and that's again, it's a great point. In my previous experience, I worked for a Fortune 100 distribution company. So in that role, it was publicly held, and you're right. It was always that race for the quarter, right? So it really was, okay, what are we doing to make the quarter? Make the quarter. Now, what's interesting is that, again, when you go to privately held, we still have our shareholder, which is obviously the owner. However, you're right. There is a different feel, a different culture, right? Because we are able to be more mission first, right? So we are still doing everything we can to deliver that value to our shareholder, but it's a different pressure. It's not that quarterly pressure that's always there.
Fewer bodies on the road.
Yes.
In our previous episode, we spoke to a gentleman who actually deals with private equity, investing in the lower middle and middle market. And he told us that he likes to invest in privately held companies because the owner is very much invested in the company, in the life of it, the history of it, rather than just seeing it as a money-making machine that does something, whatever. Now translating this into your role, because I'm very interested. I haven't met chief operating excellence officer or anyone kind of with operational excellence in the title. This is the first one. So how do you know how the idea for the role actually came about?
Yes, and to clarify, just in case any of my colleagues ever see this, I am in a director role. So I help oversee part of North America. So we are a global organization. And operational excellence was created a few years back after we've seen success applying lean principles to production.
Okay.
So I believe as a company, we saw this and say, hey, that's great. How can we apply these principles elsewhere? So then we worked with consultants to really understand how can we apply it to administration and specifically sales. And then that's where I came in. So I've been doing this for about 3 years. And my experience is I've got 28 years of sales and sales management experience. So I'm very wired on sales. So processes or process-oriented thinking is new to me or was new to me when I first started. And I'm trying to bridge that gap and helping other sales leaders, see the benefits of adopting a more process-oriented approach. It's not easy, but the benefits are there and they can be sustainable. So I think that's some of the challenges we have is that, we're always looking for the immediate results. However, when we're looking at a mindset, when we're looking at a philosophy, that takes time. So that's where you start to get your challenges.
Mm-hmm.
And the change management is actually something that we noticed in our work is the most challenging, so to speak, element you can, because we help structure processes and document and sometimes automate. But showing the people the benefits, the environment, and convincing them, or maybe ensuring their safety and security is what actually takes time and effort, because you can pretty quickly, draw the process. Okay, so now you do this, and this, and people start asking why. Last 20 years, I was doing that, and that, and it got me covered, got my bonus. So we also know that you are interested in continuous improvement. So could you tell us how the continuous improvement, which we know from, in example, software development, lives or takes shape in sales? How do you define continuous improvement and how do you implement it?
So that really, at first, I thought was a challenge, right? So as a salesperson, I pride myself in going out and selling, right? I don't follow a process. I just go and I sell to customers. So when I started learning some of the ways of doing this, and so for me, it's often when I'm talking to sales, I say that these lean principles are tangible ways of working smarter and not harder. So we always hear that saying, right? Work smarter, not harder. And then I'm always raising my hand and say, well, how do you do that? So if we look at how do you do that, so it's the basic principles of plan, do, check, act, right? So PDCA. So when working with sales teams, what we do is, let's say from a plan perspective, is that we look at their process. So really, in order to have some type of continuous improvement, it's improvement of what? So now we work with sales to say, hey, let's talk about your process. Well, and like most salespeople, I'll be like, well, I don't have a process. Okay, well, let's talk about the steps you take when you're selling. Okay, yeah, I do that. So then we just take a big whiteboard, right? And we just try to make it visual. So what are the things that you do? Well, I do this, and I call customers, and I say this, and then I do this afterwards. Great. Now let's just say that that's your current process. Now from there, we would look at saying, okay, at what step do you know you're delivering value? And what does that mean? Well, okay, is there a point where you're talking to a customer and you're identifying what their needs are? Oh yeah, well, when I sit down with them and talk about their business and our product. Okay, now this is where we try to make that connection with KPIs. So we try to say, hey, at this stage, what's an indicator that you're being successful? Okay, well, when the doctor says yes to an appointment, or when the doctor agrees to continue to take an order. So from that, we start to say, okay, now we're starting to look at ways of ensuring your process is working. So that becomes the basis. Now there's additional steps that you can take to that, which would be some type of regular meeting that you can review those KPIs. So this is where leadership comes in, because leadership really needs to be able to support, and this is part of the mindset, the philosophy, right, of operational excellence, is that really in order to have continuous improvement, you need a leader that's going to help identify the blockers, the pain points. And then as you start to identify that, then you start to modify your process. And then from there, you're looking at, okay, is that working? Is it not working? So it becomes this iterative process that just continues into the future. And when you start to have KPIs, when you have these meetings, you can start to see it. So salespeople, we like to see numbers. So if I can see that, my number is trending up, I like that. Sometimes if I see it trending down, I don't like that. But then that's where leadership comes in and says, hey, that's okay. It just means that there's something in the process we want to look at. Let me support you. So that's where we start to make that connection.
Right. So it's very interesting the way you described it, and probably someone who's listening to it will immediately think about Kaizen and the continuous improvement that's linked to that philosophy. So let's kind of take this explicitly. So you follow that a similar philosophy that's been kind of in manufacturing described as Kaizen, and the kind of the getting rid of waste, but it's obviously when applied to processes in services rather than manufacturing, it has to be slightly tweaked. Hence the kind of slight differences, right?
Yeah. Yes.
My
Go ahead,
question around here is about this modification, because this is some. Let's say you mentioned this plan, do, check, act. How do you differentiate between do and act? I must say that people have very often very, very strange definitions. And it's sometimes really interesting to hear, because do and act, they are, I would say, pretty similar. So how do you distinct, or between the two? What do you think one and another are? Is?
So I think our definition, or the way I see it being applied, is plan is the process. So this is what we plan on doing. The do is then the sales team taking those steps. What are they doing to find customers, prepare for the call, visiting? I think the check comes in with, let's say, part of the weekly meeting, where now through the KPIs we can see, is what we're doing. Let's check and see if what we are doing is working. Is this having the impact that we have? From there, based on that feedback, then we can act and make changes to it. So do we need to change what we're looking at to measure? Do we need to change the steps? Do we need to change some of those conversations? So for me, that's a kind of continuous circle of plan, do, check, act applied to a sales situation.
And then it works when it works. Like most ideas, when we try to apply similar concepts, we sometimes encounter people, and this comes to specific personalities. I would call them kind of intuitive performers, people who don't follow a specific process that they can explicitly state. Rather, they just perform and they do their job well. But when you ask them, they waver. They're not really sure how to describe it. How would you deal with these kind of people who are clearly doing their job, but they just can't subject themselves to this kind of rigorous introspection, because most of what they do is intuitive rather than explicitly stated?
So again, that's a great question. I think those are individuals, we would call them mavericks. So those are the ones that are your top performers. They just intuitively know what they should be doing. Really, I think in this environment, what you want to do is identify who those folks are, and then really use them as your knowledge source for helping with the process. And then I think also, when again we talked about that check piece of this, so utilizing them also for your best practices. So often what I say, that again, it's you're really trying to connect in any concept. You're trying to connect with your audience, right? So if you start using big words or concepts that they don't understand or they can't really apply it, then you lose people. So what you can do in these situations is use these individuals as your source for best practice. So if they're already successful, then let's say, hey, what is it that you've done? Let's utilize that. And then from there, that can become components for your new process or for your adaptation. So hopefully by bringing them more into the process, they feel more engaged, more involved, and they're able to really see a little bit more fulfillment there.
Now, have you ever encountered a person that just cannot be subjected to this? I mean, your biggest challenge because this is really about personalities, and I know people who just naturally work with this, and they're great sources of knowledge. They're also great knowledge absorbers. And there are people, and I always look with the easy people. It's easy to work. I always look at the challenges and ways of actually overcoming them and working with them, because it's always, Marian always reminds me that in any message, it's the sender's responsibility to deliver the message rather than recipients to absorb it. So as the senders of the message, the kind of senders of this methodology, we have to worry about how to make the message land. So what was your biggest challenge, and how did you overcome it?
Honestly, I would always just refer back to my previous example. So I think, the biggest challenge was really working with the mavericks, working with those ones that are saying, hey, look, I'm already successful. What can you give me or show me that's going to help me be more successful? Because I think that really kind of encapsulates it, kind of the thought process that I would have also. And I think, ultimately there's going to be some individuals that, you may not connect with, who just may ultimately say, hey, look, that just doesn't work for me. And that's fine. And I think otherwise what you're trying to do, and again, we're talking about making that connection, right? So it's the responsibility of the deliverer, who's delivering the message. So in that instance, it's my role, again, from a value perspective, understanding what is this individual value? What are they looking for? And then try to make a connection with this philosophy, with this approach. And again, with some, you're going to make that connection. With others, you can't. And as they say, that's you're not going to win them all the time. So you can always do your best.
Now that we talk about the sales and then this, let's say, unique characters, as long as they are mavericks and they are outperforming, I guess it's easier to swallow than when they are average performers. I had a friend who worked in the bank. I hope I still have a friend, but he used to work in the bank. And he told me he was working in sales. And he told me that he was one of these mavericks. And he was very often scolded because he didn't stick to the procedure. And when he was saying, but I outperform everybody else, they said, listen, but you're showing the wrong example. What you do, you disregard our procedures. Thanks to your personal abilities, you are able to outperform. But many people who work with you, they now think, disregarding procedures and processes is okay. And they underperform. So even if you personally, overperform, you are not covering the losses that we have from the people who try their best. They also want to beat the system, but they fail. So for the company, it's a loss. So how do you... There was a logic behind it, like it's the example and sticking to the procedures was better for the company than tolerating overperformer. How would you, let's say, respond to this line of thinking, or does it work in your example, in the example of your company?
I was going to say it doesn't. I don't see a kind of an apples to apples comparison, because I think in a sales environment, if someone is being successful, going outside of the process, then my thought process and what we train is that, okay, then let's look at the process itself. Because again, if someone's being successful, what we define as success should be in our process. So in this instance, are they saying something different? Are they meeting with different people? Are they going a different route? So that's where we really want to, and I think it's very unique with salespeople because we do want to encourage that. And then in my mind, you just tie that right back into continuous improvement. And then you're encouraging, this to say, hey, look at the process and, is it working for you? And if not, then, hey, that's great. We're challenging it. And challenging is okay. I think
Right.
you start to run into sometimes differences where people think challenging is bad, where it's about conflict. And I think I know it's said before, right? They said one of the biggest fears is fear of public speaking. I think one of the greatest fears is conflict. And sometimes when we say, hey, it's okay to challenge, people think that, well, there's only one way to challenge where it's a conflict. So no, you're just raising your hand and saying, hey, look, this process, or there's something that's not working here for me. Okay, then let's talk about it. Let's go and see. Let's do a little bit more digging on that.
Oh, we know some people that are actively seek out conflict, even in our own company. But that's a different story. But you raised a great point here about, because it's if that the process is challenged, then it requires what you mentioned before: management that is actually willing to embrace it, to listen to it, and promote that continuous improvement from the top.
Yeah.
Because this openness and it needs to change, to improvement, needs to be communicated loud and clear from the start, and it needs to be demonstrated. Because I think it needs just one instance when the ears are closed, the mind is closed, and it's not received the way that it should be, and the employees will immediately bottle up, and that's not good. So I think this is a great demonstration. I think it needs people like you who actually work, whose sole kind of mission is to promote that in a company, right?
Yeah, and I've been very fortunate. Doing this for the past 3 years has really turned things on top of its head for me. So I've almost been just open to a whole new world, or a whole different world, where I've got all of this experience, but now I'm seeing the world through a different lens, right? And for me, I've seen just how important leadership is within an organization over these past 3 years, right? And intuitively, my manager, my leader, I understand that. No, there is a difference between a leader and a manager. There is a very important reason why we have good, strong leaders in place. Whether at the top or even at a regional level or at a team level. But the importance of the leader, it can't be overstated. And I've been very fortunate over the past 3 years to have projects where the leadership that was involved were very much, they believed in the concept. They were fully involved with the workshops. They fully backed the concepts and the structure that was being put in place. And I think more importantly is that the leader was asking for the standards. Right? So you can put a process in place, you can put standards in place, but then you need a leader who's willing to ask for those standards because they believe that it's going to help them be more successful.
So what's the difference between leaders and managers in your like, if you would put one next to another and point, okay, this is the leader because and this is just manager because
Really, in my opinion, the leader is the person that is setting the vision for us. They're setting the direction. They're saying that, hey, here we are now, but hey, where we want to go, where we're going to go, this is what it's going to look like. Here's what the sky is going to look like. Here's what the trees are like. Here's what the birds, here's the smell, here's the taste, right? So they're making that vision tangible, something that I can get my arms around. And now your manager is in place to say, hey, we heard that from the leader. Let's break down, what do we need to do to get there? So here's again, where we are today, and here's the target picture. Now let's apply these lean principles from that guy Craig, and let's help us get there. So that's how I see the difference.
So you think both are actually necessary? Because very often when people are asked this question, they say, "Oh, a leader is someone who's great and has all the good qualities, and the manager is this 19th century, whip holder who just demands, and he's the in possession of all the bad qualities." But from your answer, I gather you think that the world actually needs both.
Oh, absolutely. And I think as your manager, you're wearing different hats, right? As we've said in the past. And it's really just, what's that role that the manager needs to play at that particular time? So are they going to be the mentor? Are they going to be the coach? Are they going to be the disciplinarian? Are they going to be, all these different things are needed to really run. Slave driver. Yeah. we hopefully are not going to be a slave driver. But again, it's a toolbox, right? What's the best tool for that situation?
No, it's really interesting.
It's really interesting because in our company we actually have someone whose unofficial title is slave driver, because we actually found at some point that we did need this kind of down to earth, you do this, and we almost had to approach it from the other end, because we had everyone who was quite visionary and thinking in terms of how do we
sure
what could be, and we needed someone to just tell them, what, guys, just do some work from once in a while.
yes absolutely.
And it helped.
I can see that.
It absolutely helped. So what you are saying, we agree. It's easy to forget sometimes when you are creating these visions. What I like what you said, that the visions should be tangible. We had, I think, a couple of episodes back, we had the whole episode about the importance of vision in running the company. However, I think this tangibility of this vision was not as strongly emphasized. And it's, if it's tangible vision, that's also easier to break down. If you know how the tree is supposed to look like, you know what tree to plant. If there's just, okay, there will be some greenery there, then you need to decide, do you want to put some bush, some rain, or a tree.
Yeah, it's a great metaphor.
It's really interesting. But there is one about continuous improvement. Sometimes it's misused, and people who say that try to implement it, they just try to avoid handling issues or controls, just as a way, let's push it, for a little later. Now we will improve something else, and it's a good way for them to avoid challenging problems, because they always can say, okay, now we are focusing on improving something which is, well, easy to improve. Did you encounter this in your work, and how did you handle it?
I would say yes. I would have to think on it to come up with some specific situations, but I think the best way to describe this would be the process that we would put in place focuses on transparency. Mm-hmm. So if we go back and say, hey, again, we've got our weekly meeting or some type of regular meeting. Mm-hmm. From there, you've got two things that take place. One, we always encourage the leaders, and we refer to it as a cascade. So at different levels of the organization, they're having the same meeting. So we always encourage the level above that leader joins the board below them. Mm-hmm. So at that point, again, you're increasing that transparency. So now what happens is that during your meeting, your sales team is raising their hand, or again, metaphorically speaking, with let's say their KPIs. So if there is an issue that's taking place there, now you're creating an environment where it's hard to really ignore that. So if something has come up as an issue, what we encourage is that, okay, now it's acknowledged during that meeting, because we have rules, right? So it's a very structured meeting, that, okay, this is something that you're not hitting it. Okay, then we should follow up on a go and see. Now, again, it's possible that, let's say, the leader kind of just avoids it. Mm-hmm. What's possible is going to happen two things. One, those numbers or those KPIs are going to get escalated through this cascade. So the numbers here will be seen here. And then also you have the leader who's going to attend the meeting to see and hear what's taking place. So I would think in those situations, either the leader will see, hey, why is this deviation in place? And then that leader can do a go and see with their employee, who is, again, the leader for that bottom crew. Mm-hmm. So I hope it makes sense, but the structure that we've put in place hopefully minimizes that by increasing the visibility to the key numbers or the key figures, the processes. And then from there, it's really just a question of, okay, hey, this is a challenge. What are you doing to find out and to resolve that so that it's sustainable in the future?
There's, so I think also,
go ahead.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. And I think there's also a slightly different angle to it, that what you mentioned about visibility, because having visible KPIs, visible standards, visible goals means that you avoid two things. You avoid this kind of avoidance of having to do something, but you also avoid doing something because it's done without any reason behind it, because everything then should align with those goals and those standards, and shouldn't be done just because in a policy somewhere it states that it should be done. Every
Yes.
time we go into the building, we wave our hand, and like, why?
Right.
So in one of my previous jobs, I did have this kind of requirement that every single risk needed to have a control, and even if it was a risk which was controlled elsewhere, or pretty much uncontrollable external, we just had to deal with it. So we did use, I have to admit, continuous improvement as in a way of marking something, as in, we'll deal with it on a kind of general qualitative rather than quantitative basis. But it's I think it's important to underline that it needs to be, through that clarity, you achieve the kind of goal-oriented specificity of that continuous improvement, rather than make it very nebulous. But also, I wanted to ask, within your company, obviously there's your role. How do other senior managers approach this? Because it's kind of, again, thinking a bit in a contrarian way, it came to my mind, are there people who think, oh, we have a director of continuous improvement and quality excellence, we don't need to think about it, his responsibility?
That's a valid question, and I would say within our organization, we try to say that operational excellence isn't something that you just do, that it's a check mark, right? So I'm going to work with Craig and now I'm done. That really, operational excellence is a mindset that helps you do things within your area, right? So we're a means to help you do something. It's not just something that you do and it's done. But following this philosophy, following this mindset is really going to help you in the long run. So then, what does that mean? So we have a team of people global, and we have groups or individuals that focus on different areas within the company. So production, sales, R&D, etc. So then what we do is it's almost a branding effort internally. So we brand ourselves and we say, hey, look, work with us so that we can come in and train you on these principles. And from there, we can help you look for projects for, again, looking at your processes. And then we look to identify ways of improving productivity. So really our role is, in the best case scenario, we're trying to work ourselves out of a job. Because ultimately we want to instill this philosophy, this continuous improvement, where they're looking at their processes, right? They're always looking to say and remove waste. And you had mentioned that before. And ultimately where they don't need us. So we really try to place ourselves as a resource, and not as, we're not the quality department, right? We're not going to come and audit you, to say, well, you're not doing this. We're more as an enabler to help you, again, be more productive and more efficient, but again, in a tangible way.
Yeah, it's similar to do something, but we unnecessarily sometimes succeed in is we like to call ourselves the last consulting company you'll need. And especially with our digital twinning, it's very often we find out that the clients are able to model the processes and the risks, and they are getting fluent in it. And it's careful what you wish for.
Yeah, I believe it. And I think, go ahead, please. What I was going to say is that I think ultimately there's always going to be work out there, right? There's always going to be something that needs to be looked at. Or let me say it this way. I think there's always a need for a third person perspective on a situation. And I think from there's always going to be a need for people who can come in and help ask questions, or come in and help train people on maybe asking the right questions, right? So I think, which takes me to a whole separate topic. But
Are you sure that you didn't work with risk? Because that's something that Artur was drilling into us. It's this 3 lines of control. So you have people who do, and they need to control some risks and have a realization of that, and they need to have people who control them. And then you need external audit that comes, and like the proper risk management is exactly structured as you describe it.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yes, it is. Sorry to interrupt you, but I was wondering, because that's something that Artur was drilling into
because
us.
It just works. It's that's the proper approach. I wholeheartedly agree with it. But I wanted to ask you something, because we like to give our audience some pointers, some advice, and if people wanted to create a role like yours in their companies, could you give us a kind of 10-point rundown of what would be required for this role to actually make sense, and what would be the kind of the top 3 things that role would need to focus on?
Ooh, that's a great question. I think I would just have to talk through that with you now. But I would think if someone was looking to start up this type of role, this type of position within the company, I think you would definitely start off with, let's say, a shared position. So I would look at someone within the organization and say, okay, hey, can we take, let's say 50% of their time and put it towards this, this concept, this initiative. So we start there. So now that we have the headcount, now the question is, okay, well, what are we doing there? So I think really looking at training on the basics of lean. So when they first trained me, and that's probably what I would do, is kind of go through, what I went through, which was from a training perspective, and even let's say before that, but just helping this individual and helping the company understand what are we trying to do. So again, kind of goes back to that vision piece, right? So we say, hey, we are looking to. There's always going to be competitors out there. We're always going to be looking for a way to do more with less. That's the nature of business. So we have this concept of operational excellence that we would like to introduce within this organization. Timmy, Billy, Susie, they're going to help us with this, and they've been trained on the principles of lean. They're going to train us on these concepts, and what we're going to do is look at each of the departments and talk about what are the things that we can do within your department to look at your processes. Oh, what does that mean? It's okay. Let's just talk about the things that you do, kind of what I mentioned before. So I think from my perspective, you've got, again, the vision of the role. You've got your headcount that's going to be shared. You're working with the individual departments. And then from there, it's just this process of looking at their processes, educating them on this, educating on the core concepts. And I think, again, the overall concept will take time. The mindset takes time. But in the meantime, what you would do then is identify projects, maybe a lighthouse project, something within an area that you can identify some solid wins, maybe within your logistics department, maybe within customer service and sales. But I think that's where you start looking at, then you would run a typical project, right? And identify, where can our wins be that are helping to focus on customer value, but then are also helping to eliminate waste. And we didn't necessarily talk about value and waste, some of those concepts. But again, that's why I liked the Toyota production system, or again, this lean approach, where you're identifying what value is, again, from the customer's perspective, but then also everything else is really a waste. And this was, from Henry Ford, right? What's not value is waste. And the waste is really broken up. And again, you probably already know, right? You're 7, plus 2 waste, depending on what list you work at. But I like that because even those waste can apply to sales. And those are things that, again, are your tangible blueprints that could be utilized if you were to roll this out into a new company.
It's interesting that you mentioned the blueprints, because this is something that the word that we sometimes use when we prepare the processes to be shown to the new people. I'm just wondering, what's your turnover and how quickly can new people enter this environment of continuous improvement and are those processes that you have easy to be adapted by people, I don't know, trained in different types of sales, maybe more cowboying, or less, I don't know. It's yeah, but how the new people that enter your company, how they see it.
So it's a good point, because it really depends on which way you want to answer the question, right? Because again, we have our internal operational excellence team, but then you have people who are coming into the organization who are being taught this concept. I think if we look at people coming into the company and training them on these concepts, it takes time and reinforcement. So when you roll something like this out, it's not something you can typically just do in a couple of hours. It usually, through a workshop, it takes days. But then, as we know, you only learn so much at a time, and in different ways, right? So that needs to be reinforced over time with additional trainings. So again, to go back to your first point, if it's not a workshop and someone is new coming to your organization, I'll meet with them for a couple of hours on three different bases, or 3 different times, where I introduce the basic concepts, because then they're stepping into the existing meetings, right? They're stepping into the existing environment. So I'm there to kind of help them say, hey, look, this is what you're going to expect. And then their manager will kind of help that also. So it's really kind of this gradual process of immersing them. From a operational excellence team like myself, it took me a good 2 years to really, I think, understand these concepts, because again, it was so different for me. For me, I always preached, and I still do it now, but I need a tool, right? In order to do something, I need the tool first, right? So, I'm going to, I want to be a carpenter, so I'm going to go out and buy all of this equipment. Well, do you know how to do it? Well, no, but I'm going to go buy this saw because it's going to make me a carpenter.
I know this approach. I know. So what are your tools? If someone wanted to be an operational excellence director, what is the tool? The one tool of choice that you go to the nearest shop and you buy immediately?
The one tool of choice, I would have to say, it's going to be corny. No, I was going to say connecting, the ability to connect with your audience. I think that's got to be the first tool.
It's hard to buy. I checked a couple of shops.
It's on Amazon. You can get it in 2 days. It'll be drone dropped to your front door.
I think it's a great point, and it goes back to the lending the message, right? Since it's your responsibility. It's funny. I wrote it was some time ago, but it's still on our Cognition Shared Solutions webpage. We've got this series of articles on link of processes to Kaizen, to Six Sigma, to Lean, and how they kind of all these operational frameworks link to having a process and improving it. And I think we've pretty much covered those topics that some time ago I kind of thought about in those articles. We've covered this in this episode. So nice. I think if anyone wants to kind of some theoretical background behind it, shamelessly, I refer them to the reading on our website. I think, do you have any kind of sources that you rely on that would give people more information about your approach and what you do?
That's a good question. There was well, that'll just stay there until it falls over. There's a book from a
Sales Process Excellence by Michael J. Webb. Most of our audience is audio only, so
okay.
Read it.
But yes, he was a gentleman I found. So I really have, let's say, 3 sources. The first one is working with our consultant in Europe who trained us on these concepts. So anytime I really have any questions, I go to them. So they're my foundation. But as we know, consultants, you have to, pay them sometimes. So on my own, what I do is I often go to YouTube, and in my searches, I found this gentleman, Michael Webb. And some of the things he talked about was exactly what I was learning to do. And I didn't really think that there was many people out there doing this. So I had reached out to him, I had read his book, and I was like, wow, this is great. And so through that, I continued to really refine my message, my thought process, so that when I'm talking to either sales leaders or business leaders, it's really from a sales perspective of really saying, hey, in your organization, how do you find, convert, and keep customers? So I continue to find ways of simplifying, because I think a lot of these concepts we talk about with, again, Six Sigma, with Lean, they're great concepts, but unless you can really connect with your audience in a way that they understand these topics, you're not going to have that impact that you really want to
have. Okay, well, and if people want to contact you, is LinkedIn the best place to kind of reach out? And
yeah, that's a great place. I'm always checking LinkedIn on a daily basis.
Brilliant. Well, thank you very much for all the information you've shared. I think it was a great episode, and I think a very practical one, because what you've given are some very specific, very practical pointers, which hopefully our audience can use. And well, maybe soon we will see more directors of operational excellence in other companies. It will become a position that is quite popular, because I think it has a foundation, it has a goal, it has a reason, and we are always promoting this kind of thinking. So now giving it a name and position and a place in an organization is something that we're absolutely 100% behind.
Perfect.
Thank you very much for taking part in the episode. And as always, let's hope it was of use to someone.
Thank you for listening.
Also, don't miss the next one, where we'll be talking about telecommunication infrastructure, which all modern businesses rely on, but most people rarely think about. To demystify this ubiquitous yet so important resource, we've invited Mike Gavin, former senior director who worked for such companies as Samsung and Verizon.
Subscribe on your favorite podcast platform or visit bda.show to find out more about future episodes and guests. You can also check out cognition.llc for more information on Cognition Shared Solutions, our services, and other events hosted by us.
For now, it's thank you from myself, Artur and my co-host, your friendly neighborhood data guy, Dr. Marian.
Thank you and goodbye.